So, depression is often characterized by impaired emotional information processing, and there have been many studies over the years that have looked at emotional processing of facial and vocal stimuli, but relatively little in the area of music. Additionally, there's been very little research done on the varying levels of depression and its connection to the perception of ambiguous music. So why I'm really looking at this is because musical therapy is generally considered to be a fairly safe alternative to medication in the treatment of depressive symptoms. So by analyzing participants' preferences, interpretation, and effects of instrumentation, it could lead to safer and more effective therapies. And if supported, ambiguous music could be used as a gentler alternative to sad music and musical therapy. So mood disorders have been associated with impaired emotional processing and negative interpretations of ambiguous and visual stimuli. Ayhood et al. Subjects were asked to provide labels to various excerpts of music conveying four different emotions. Those who suffered from a major depressive disorder attributed less labels to all manipulations, with the exception of sad, where there was no change between the control and the experimental groups. Narco et al. Found that major depression was associated with the negative perception of the processing of emotional stimuli when compared with healthy controlled subjects. This included interpersonal stimuli such as faces and voices, as well as emotional processing of music. Recognition problems are characterized by negative attentional biases and information processing. So Punkanon, Irola, and Robitaille remarked that patients with major depressive disorder, when shown sad and neutral faces, expressions simultaneously would focus more on the sad faces and shift attention away from and had a reduced sensitivity in happy facial expressions. So my overarching theory is the cognitive biases, which is the tendency for an individual to infer negative attributes to stimuli based on their own subjective reality from the perception of the input. So this sometimes can lead to illogical interpretations and perceptual distortions in the processing of emotional stimuli such as faces, voices, and music. So my first research question was, do individuals who suffer from depressive traits perceive ambiguous music more negatively than those with less depressive traits? So this was expanding on other people's research. So my first hypothesis was the greater the amount of depressive traits an individual has, the more likely that ambiguous music would be interpreted negatively. My second question was, does the instrument played affect the interpretation of music? And this was exploratory research, and this was kind of my baby of the study. So my second hypothesis was due to the varying timbres of different instruments, the emotional interpretation of the songs may vary depending on the instrument. And my third question was, will the music exposed to cause temporary mood effects or changes in the participant? My third hypothesis was dependent on the condition assigned to, the patient will experience a change in mood from the exposure to the music. So these are just my IVs and my EVs. So I had three independent variables. My first was my quasi-IV, which was the level of depressive traits. So that was split into low, medium, and high. And I had the second IV, which was the mood of the song, which was happy and ambiguous. And then the third, which is the instrumentation, which was guitar and piano. So my dependent variables in the study was the information processing and mood. So this is just a quick overview of what my design looks like. So it's a mixed design. It's a 3x2x2. So you have the depression level, would be all the between subject stuff, and then the within subjects, which is the ambiguous and the happy stimuli or music clips, and then the G and the P stand for guitar and piano, and dependent on what you were assigned to, either for guitar or piano first. So I had 49 total participants. I had 21 males and 28 females. And my depression groups, I had 17 low, 16 medium, and 16 high. And these participants participated for either course credit or a $2 Tim Hortons gift card. So in my study, I had 6 measures. I had the Grimes Brief Depression Scale, which is a 7-item measure used as a brief screening method for depression. The 10-item personality inventory, which is a 10-item self-report measure used to briefly assess the big 5 personality dimensions. I had the brief mood introspection scale, which is actually not so brief. It is a self-report measure that examines mood, experience, and it consists of 16 adjectives, with 2 items selected from 8 mood states. And then I had my creative scales, which were the emotional perception scale and the enjoyment scale. So that was a 4-item self-report measure designed to assess the perception of happiness, sadness, ambiguity, and musical excerpts, as well as indicate their level of enjoyment of the said excerpt. So then there is the demographic questions, which again was a creative measure that just has basic questions that include age, gender, and ethnicity. And then the musical stimuli, which was 20 musical excerpts utilized for comparison between 10 ambiguous and 5 happy emotionalities. So when the participant showed up, they would be randomly assigned using a random number table to one of the 4 groups, and the computer would be already set up for them. And so they would start off by saying there's some consent forms. So they then complete the pre-test measures of the Ryan's Brief Depression Scale, the 10-item personality inventory, and the initial brief mood introspection scale. Next, the participants were exposed to the musical emotion recognition task. So after each excerpt, participants completed the create a scale for the emotional perception, level of enjoyment, as well as additionally the brief mood introspection scale. Upon completion, the participant exited the survey and was thoroughly debriefed, and the whole process took about 25 to 35 minutes. So I started off with the description of the score was analyzed, and 2 participants were signified as outliers and removed from the data set. They didn't fill out enough, so they weren't able to remain in the data set. The remaining participants were split into 3 depression groups using a tertiary split, so low, medium, and the high depressive traits. So my first hypothesis, I ran a 2-way repeated measures ANOVA, and it was conducted to determine if individuals with more depressive traits perceived ambiguous music more negatively than those with less depressive traits. So a significant interaction was found between the happy and ambiguous conditions for those in the varying level of depression, so the low, medium, high, in terms of how sad they rated their condition's music. So the high depressive traits group was the least likely to rate the ambiguous music as sad compared to the low and medium depressive groups. This does not support the initial hypothesis. Instead, this suggests that those with high depressive traits interpret the ambiguous music more positively. So regardless of the condition, as you can see, the high depressive group rating of music was similar. It's almost parallel. Which, in the happy condition, they were more likely to assign higher amounts of sadness rating to the clip, while in the ambiguous condition, they were more likely to give a less sad rating. My second hypothesis, to test this, I ran another 2-way repeated measures ANOVA to determine if the instrument played affected the interpretation of the music. A main effect was found between the interpretation of guitar and piano in terms of how happy the instrumentation was rated. When piano is played in the ambiguous music, it is interpreted as less happy, so they were giving less happy ratings on the happy scale in terms of the happy condition. However, the piano was rated to be more happy than the same clips that they heard in guitar. The instrumentation in the happy stimuli group had a significant difference between the interpretation between the piano and the guitar. The ambiguous music, however, while not significant, showed the opposite trend. To test the third hypothesis, a 2-way analysis of variance was conducted to determine if the music exposed to the participants caused any temporary mood effects or changes, but there wasn't anything. So there's no main effects or interactions detected. Therefore, the participants' moods were not influenced by the musical condition that they were exposed to. So my discussion. Regardless, the first hypothesis, it was expected that a cognitive bias would occur for those with higher level depressive traits. However, the results showed the opposite trend. While this is an interesting finding, it could be the result of having a fairly normative population. While the depressive groups were split into low, medium, and high groups, the low was more representative of no depression, medium is mild depression, and high is a mild moderate depression. This finding could also be a result of an opposing hypothesis to cognitive bias, which is known as depressive realism. So in depressive realism, those who suffer from milder levels of depression are said to give more realistic interpretations of stimuli, which may account for the lower level of SAD ratings given to the higher depressive group. So for hypothesis 2, while further research will need to be conducted, it's exciting to find a perceptual difference in instrument between guitar and piano. This result has further implications for musical therapy because it can help determine the most therapeutic ways in which to treat the client, which instrument that they should be actually using in these therapies. Hypothesis theory. While mood inducement effects were not found in the present study, this could again be a result of a rather normative population. If the study was replicated with a higher depressed group, there's a potential for more significant findings. However, it could support that when treating more mildly depressed individuals, it would be important to use stronger mood-inducing musical pieces, i.e. sad as opposed to ambiguous. So limitations. So with my population, there's quite a few limitations. There's low levels of reported depressive traits, and I had a limited number of participants, and those that were taken were from a convenience sample. And then I had the volunteer bias. So they were either participating for course credit, and they might not actually be that interested in filling it out properly. And then those who seek out participant may differ largely from the rest of the student population. In particular, if you're looking at depressed individuals who are probably not really wanting to get involved so much. Methodology, so the controlled testing environment was really difficult to maintain. It was loud outside, and when you're trying to listen to music and trying to get immersed into it, it can be difficult if people are running around or throwing things and stuff like that. And due to time constraints of room bookings, singular or multiple experiments would be conducted at a single time. So in the times that I did have multiple people, I did try to separate them and have them turn their backs to one another. That way that there would be less involvement between the two. And then my actual pieces that I used for the clips were synthesized as opposed to using actual musicians to play these pieces. So for further research, I would first offer to use non-synthesized instrumentation. I would also like to see the exploration of other instruments in the emotional perception. But of course, if they want to do further analysis into the guitar and the piano, that would be really, really cool to see too, because I only did find it on the one condition. It would also be interesting to explore further the effects of ambiguous music on mood inducement in a mildly depressed and severely depressed population, because there really isn't a lot that I've found on the mildly depressed individuals in particular. So it'd be really cool to see how ambiguous music overall will be affecting the population.
Questions or comments for Desiree? Desiree, I thought it was really interesting that you got this unexpected result, but I'm also wondering what was going on with the mood, because I'm really surprised that you didn't get a mean effective mood. Though you did get an interaction effect. I'm just wondering, did you find a difference in the mood? I guess, did you see any patterns in the mood ratings? Between the so-called happy music or the ambiguous music? Was it in the predicted direction, or?
A little bit, but there really wasn't very much. I even ran it 2 different ways, so I did it as repeated measures, and then I also tried to do it as a pre-test and a post-test sort of way to see if the initial mood and the last mood would lead to it. There really wasn't a lot, but why I think that might have been is a lot of the time there would be participants' friends outside the door or things like that, so I'm thinking that
A lot of distractions.
a lot of distractions, so I think that could have been.
And you said these excerpts were taken from past research, so did they find a mood-related difference in the music in that research?
They did, so that's
They
why I
did,
was very
okay.
confused by that myself.
Okay, so they had established that these were the happy pieces, these were the ambiguous pieces.
Yes.
Do you think it had anything to do with like the age of the students? Because like I'm thinking like probably in the study that you got this from, maybe they were like older and more experienced with like symphonies and that sort of thing compared to people that are our age.
I definitely have been thinking a lot about that lately because it is classical pieces, and so I feel like it's not as relatable. In other research though, it didn't matter if it was sad or ambiguous, they were able to,
Regardless of age?
yeah, and they would still have it. So I was kind of confused by that, but it would be really neat to see maybe, even if you chose instrumental pieces, but maybe more poppy or something like that.
Maybe like some of the
That are still
dance music that's going around these days.
Yeah.
I was going to say, even like in my research, even my music, I use like instrumental as well. And like I was trying to do like the 2 different moods, like mine was moods, but it was looking at positive and negative. And most of mine, people all like the music, and the music that's supposed to be inside didn't really. So I almost wonder if maybe today you have to look at maybe more of the pop music. So some of the research I did use pop music, and I used like say like thrash metal as like the negative, and then the positive was more like aqua and like dance music kind of thing. So even like other aspects of music could be the influence.
Like when I think of classical music, I don't think of it as happy or sad. I think of it as all kind of sad.
I wish I put the pieces in because the upbeat are like in your
really
face.
upbeat.
Yeah, and I did find a little bit of a trend. I didn't put enough to report it, but people who were in the higher depressive traits who were listening to the happy music did rate it lower on the like scale, which is kind of close to one of the first studies I looked at that was talking about how that they would avoid focusing on like happy faces and things like that. So that kind of worked, but it wasn't significant, so I didn't bother.
I was just wondering why you use like only like no voices with your music.
Because I wanted to look specifically at just different instrumentation. So I wanted to see, I felt like the voices could influence the perception just as much. Like you might like that voice, and so it might change the perception of it. So I wanted to just have the purest contradiction, I guess.
Or what the voice is saying, that could affect it too.
Oh, and that's definitely
So.
true. I did speak with a woman in California who was going to do it for me, and she was an opera singer, but she was going to just do it by chanting, so to avoid any kind of words. So I did consider it, but I ultimately decided against it. I was thinking of using it as a third group, and I was like, too many.
Too many levels.
Yes.